Today, I will be talking about every single release of Pac-Man. From every console that had it to every individual version if a console has more than one. Now, of course, I think we should get ourselves familiar with the game first. And with that being said, this should also be where the list should start. The original arcade version of Pac-Man. The arcade version of Pac-Man is the most well-known version of Pac-Man besides the NES version, and there isn't really anything special to talk about. It's just regular Pac-Man. Now, with that being said, I will be challenging myself to at least beat the first level of every version, just so we have a common sense of how hard every version is. And with this version, I obviously recommend it because it's the original game. The Atari 2600 version of Pac-Man is surprisingly pretty decent, even though people like to dog on it all the time because they couldn't even have dots instead of lines, but honestly it isn't that bad of a version. I want to also quickly note throughout the gameplay, you'll see me die from seemingly nothing. There was a ghost there, it was just flashing. Through my end, I saw the ghost, it's just you can't see it through the gameplay. Also, I'm incredibly sorry for the gameplay going dark. I was not looking at the recording while I was playing it, so I had no clue any of this was even happening. And it has everything that you want out of a normal Pac-Man game. If you fuck with the game select switch enough, you can enable a 2-player mode, which is pretty cool. And this is one of those Atari games where if you switch the color switch, it actually turns the game black and white, instead of just keeping its color. So yeah, honestly, this is a pretty decent Pac-Man, and the map layout is different as well. And I'm actually kind of surprised they never brung back this map as like a little Easter egg in any of the Pac-Man games, but hey, I don't know, they might have. Now, there was one issue that I've had throughout the playthrough of this game, and that's the fact that I'm using an Atari 2600 controller. I know you can plug in a Sega Genesis controller, but I didn't for some reason, so controlling it sucked bad, because the Atari 2600 controller is incredibly stiff. And it also doesn't help that the hitboxes are a little off. I feel like I should have gotten a pellet, even though I didn't. So overall, do I recommend this version? Yeah, it's not too bad. Pac-Man for Atari 5200 is cute. I will not lie, these sprites are actually kind of adorable. But that might just be me. And now, how's the port? It's alright. It's definitely Pac-Man. But, again, besides that, there isn't really too much to say. I can say one thing, though, and that is the fact that if you press the start button anytime during gameplay, it will restart you back to the first level. It's pretty much just does the same thing that the restart button does, except it just takes you to the game instead of taking you to the title screen. But besides that, honestly, it isn't that bad of a port. It's pretty decent. My only issue with the game is the death animation. It takes a full 2 seconds. Now, I know that's a little nitpicky, but it's really noticeable if you've played 2 other Pac-Mans before this one. But would I recommend it? Yeah, I would actually recommend it way better than the 2600 version. So I noticed this mistake I did when recording the footage for this version of Pac-Man that I'm about to play, and that being, I forgot to turn back on the audio when I was recording the 5200 version of Pac-Man. I'm incredibly sorry that you don't get to listen to pretty much just Pac-Man. But yeah, I really did notice that mistake while recording the footage for the next Pac-Man we're going to be talking about. So yeah, sorry. Hey, our first console with multiple versions of Pac-Man, and it's the Emberson Arcadia 2001. Jesus Christ. And they're not actually Pac-Man. They are kind of bootleg clones of them. So the first one we're going to be talking about is Crazy Gobbler. Jesus fucking Christ. This is Pac-Man with a question mark. One of the things you will notice is that you can straight up just stop moving if you really wanted to. And to continue going that direction, you have to hold down that direction, which is kind of annoying. Another thing is the ghosts are not programmed correctly. They will straight up just turn around to get to you, which is not how Pac-Man ghosts work whatsoever. And when you get a power pellet, the ghosts are programmed to run away from you, which means they will just stay in a corner. Another thing you'll notice is that this game is very slow. You are very slow in it. And also the live counters use the exact same sprite as you, so they move with you. Would I recommend this? No, I would not. I would absolutely not recommend this version of Pac-Man. This is a really bad version of it. But we have 2 others, so hopefully one of those will be good. Next up is Cat Tracks, with an X. I legitimately got a headache recording the gameplay. Probably because of all the loud-ass fucking noises that kept playing during the entire fucking game. From picking up the pellets, which make a loud-ass squeak sound, to dying, which I would literally rather listen to someone killing a cat than listen to that fucking death sound in this game. It is god-awful, and it has the same AI for the ghosts as Crazy Gobbler. And it doesn't help the fact that since they can turn around to continue chasing you, I died twice, and I got almost no progress. And in the middle, where the fruit usually is, you get a truck. You become a truck. And it is a slow process becoming that truck. Luckily, they can't hurt you while turning into it, but still, this is not a good version of Pac-Man. This is worse than Crazy Gobbler. Now, hopefully the next game, Nibblemen, will be better. Because, Jesus, I actually got a headache recording the gameplay footage of this one. Next up, Nimblemen. Oh my god. This has the same sounds as Cat Tracks, but it actually controls good. Now, this is where I started to think that maybe it's not emulating correctly, because no way this was the actual death sound of this, and I'm not looking it up, because I don't want to hear it again. But Nimblemen is way better than Crazy Gobbler and Cat Tracks. Now, it isn't easier, nor is it good, but it's way better than those 2. So if you were to emulate any of these games, go with Nimblemen. That's your best option. And also, I got a game over and I had 1 pellet left. Nice. I'm not doing it again. So would I recommend it? No. And that might have something to do with the difficulty. I want to give a quick mention to Casey Munchkin for the Magnavox Odyssey 2. While looking up for Pac-Man clones that could have been on this console, this came up, and it is not really that much like Pac-Man. It definitely seems more of a Pac-and-Pal than a Pac-Man, but yeah, that's why I'm not going to be reviewing it, because it's not really Pac-Man. That's like saying Lock and Chase is a direct Pac-Man clone. Next up is Muncher for the Bally Astrocade. Now, this thing was a pain to set up, but once I got it all set up, this is a pretty decent version of Pac-Man. I had no issues playing it, and I even got to 3 levels without dying, which never happened to me in Pac-Man before. So, just by that, it might be a little too easy, but hey, it's Pac-Man. Who cares if it's too easy, as long as it's not too hard. And I had no issues. It sounded like Pac-Man and it played like Pac-Man. So much so, I actually don't know how legal it is. The only issue that I came across while playing it was ghosts can go up from the home. If you don't know what I'm talking about, in Pac-Man, above the home is 2 paths that you can take, but ghosts physically cannot go up there. They are programmed specifically not to go up there. and in this port they can, but that wasn't too much of an issue. But yeah, this version of Pac-Man is incredibly good. It's strangely good, and I 100% recommend it if you have a Bally Astrocade. It's just, if you don't have one, I would not recommend going through the steps to try and get this thing emulated, as it uses MAME, and setting up emulators in MAME is really annoying. Oh, the ColecoVision has 3 different Pac-Mans again, and only 2 of them actually officially released. That's awesome. So the first up is Pac-Man Collection, which is a collection of Pac-Man games. Who would have guessed? It includes 3 titles, Pac-Man, Pac-Man Plus, and Miss Pac-Man, but looking at the main menu, you will not see Pac-Man Plus, and that's because you have to put in a secret cheat code to get to Pac-Man Plus, and I'm not going to tell you that cheat code because we're only playing regular Pac-Man. And when you get to the game, you'll see a little credit. Yeah, you have to insert credits. I don't know how this worked. This might have been an arcade game that used a ColecoVision. I don't know. And I pressed every single button on the damn keyboard, and the one that actually adds credits is the plus button. Yikes. Playing it, though, it's Pac-Man. There isn't anything special, and I even checked to see if the ghosts can go on top from home, and they can't. So pretty much it's just Pac-Man. But it's a lot more annoying. Don't forget, this is inferior hardware. The sounds are not going to sound the best. But overall, it's a pretty decent port of Pac-Man. Here we have the prototype version of Pac-Man for ColecoVision. I was expecting this to be the exact same as the Pac-Man Collection Pac-Man, but no. This one's actually softer on the ears, and honestly, this is a pretty decent port of Pac-Man. Now, it's gotten to the point where I'm testing if the ghost can go up from home. I gotta stop doing that, and I'll probably stop after this next one. Overall, this is a pretty decent port of Pac-Man. It's softer on the ears, and honestly, it's kind of fun. So would I recommend it? Yes. I also don't know if I said if I would recommend the Pac-Man Collection, so I would also recommend the Pac-Man Collection as well. And now we have Dak-Man from the year 2000. What the fuck? Websites were saying that this was a legit ColecoVision game, not a fucking homebrew title. Anyway, this is god-awful. The most smoothest animation is your death animation. But overall, it isn't too bad of a port. The biggest issues I've had with it are the ghosts just go wherever. I don't know if they're actually actively trying to chase you or anything. They just go. They just do whatever they want. But is this a good port of Pac-Man? It's not. Sorry, it's not that good. And from the gameplay footage, you should know why. Next up is Crazy Chewy, or Crazy Pucker, or Crazy Mooney, or Crazy Chicky for the CreativeVision. I'm not joking. This game has 4 different names. And apparently, Crazy Chicky is slightly different. Jesus. And there's another fun fact about this game. Apparently, it was the very first released game for the CreativeVision. Imagine the first game for your console being Pac-Man. I don't know how this did not fly off the shelves. Now, reviewing it, I couldn't get it to work. I straight up could not get the emulator to boot up the game. Nice. And I cannot be bothered to open up an emulator. I'm just going to delete right after this recording, all because I wanted to play one singular game of Pac-Man. So would I recommend it? No, because I couldn't even get the emulator to work. Pac-Man for Intellivision. So apparently you can't emulate Intellivision games. I've tried everything. Nothing would let me emulate it. I've tried it on Windows, and it said that I needed the BIOS files, even though I had the BIOS files in exactly where they wanted me to put it in. And I tried it on a PSP emulator. Couldn't get it to boot, it would crash. So apparently the Intellivision is physically impossible to emulate. And good, I would not want to control Pac-Man with dumb number buttons. I would not recommend it. Finally, we're back to actually playing Pac-Man again. This is Pac-Man for the Atari 7800, and it's a pretty decent port of Pac-Man. I had no issues with the game, besides one thing, and that was me going through a ghost. But that came to my benefit. But besides that, there is no major issues with this version of Pac-Man. I would 100% recommend it. Pac-Man for the Atari 8-bit console. This version of Pac-Man is another pretty cute looking one. I mean, look at these ghosts. But besides that, this plays like a pretty decent port of Pac-Man. And I'm a real big fan of the sound that plays whenever you eat a ghost. It actually makes me feel like I accomplished something today. So I would recommend it if you have an 8-bit Atari computer laying around. So weirdly, the Sega Master System did not get Pac-Man, but the Game Gear did. That sucks, because the Game Gear screen is incredibly zoomed in, and I feel claustrophobic playing this version of Pac-Man. Is it a good version of Pac-Man? Yeah, sure. It's just too zoomed in and too cluttered. It's weird, and I'm not really a fan of it. So personally, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's a pretty decent version of Pac-Man. Finally, in the moment everyone's been waiting for, I finally get to talk about the NES version of Pac-Man. It's not that good. There's some things about this version that make me question stuff, like, how come stuff is not colored incorrectly? Like the fruits. You can use more than one color on the NES when it comes to sprites. I don't know why they didn't just use all the colors. And there's also the white ghost, which replaced Pinky. This one really makes me question a lot of stuff, mainly colors. Overall, it is a good version, it's just, color-wise it's weird, but I'd still recommend it. I want to make mention that somehow, some way, almost every single 4th generation video game console has no regular version of Pac-Man. This is including the CDI, the Sega Genesis, the Atari Lynx, the Super Nintendo, all the Amiga consoles, the TurboGrafx 16. All of these do not have a regular version of Pac-Man, but they have a version of Miss Pac-Man, or an alternative version of Pac-Man, like Pac-Mania. The only console that has a regular version of Pac-Man from the 4th generation is the original Game Boy. That is insane to me. I don't know how we went an entire generation of video games without a regular version of Pac-Man. So our next one is the Game Boy version of Pac-Man. So, how does the one and only 4th generation Pac-Man game hold up to the nothing else on the 4th generation? Well, it's okay. Pac-Man for Game Boy is pretty decent. It's incredibly zoomed in, more zoomed in than before. Yeah, it's so zoomed in that it has to actually scroll horizontally as well, because of the giant box they put on the side just to tell you how many lives you have, when it could have literally just been a Pac-Man in the corner with a number next to it. But besides that, this is a pretty okay version of Pac-Man. If you have a Game Boy Advance, just pick up one of the a million Pac-Mans for Game Boy Advanced. I would not recommend going for this one unless you only have an original Game Boy, or you want to play a Super Nintendo version of Pac-Man, since the Super Nintendo never got one. This one's gonna go really fast because I didn't even know it existed in the first place, but apparently there's a Game Boy Color version of Pac-Man as well. That literally the only difference is it has a proper color palette, and also comes with another game, and it was distributed by Acclaim. Thanks, Acclaim. You have now added a second Pac-Man to the 4th generation. And actually, since it's a black cartridge game as well, you can play this on a Super Nintendo in full color instead of a predetermined color palette, which is pretty cool. Hey, our first Namco Museum. Namco Museum for the Nintendo 64 has a version of Pac-Man on it, and man, do those sprites look tiny. But besides that, it is a pretty decent version of Pac-Man. And by decent, I mean okay. And by okay, I mean, yep, that is a version of Pac-Man playing on a Nintendo 64. There isn't much to say about it. And when I pressed start on the menu, it scared me. So would I recommend it? Yeah, sure. Somehow, someway, the Neo Geo Pocket Color, not the original, the color version, has Pac-Man on it. The 3DO doesn't have Pac-Man, but the Neo Geo Pocket Color does. And this version of Pac-Man just feels like the Game Gear version again. There isn't really too much to say about it. It is pretty decent, but again, I'm not a fan of the zoomed-in screen. So would I recommend it? Sadly, no. Honestly, I was expecting the PlayStation to have a lot more Namco museums and Pac-Mans, but surprisingly very little. So, Namco Museum Volume 1 for PlayStation 1 is a pretty decent collection. It's not even a pretty decent collection, it's a awesome collection. All the Namco museums for the original PlayStation are awesome, just because of all the extras they could have. Like this first one, which talks about Pac-Man coasters, and you can walk around, and it's honestly kind of cool. But honestly, I think the person that ripped this didn't rip it right, because some stuff is just weird. But you're not here for that. You're here for the Pac-Man. How does the Pac-Man play? It doesn't matter how good the presentation is if the game isn't good. It's Pac-Man. I think it might just be me, but I feel like Pac-Man controls a little weird. Like, he controls just fine, but like his movements just seem a little off to me. I don't know. I think it's just me. And there's also the fact that some sounds didn't play when they should have, like eating the ghosts. But besides all that, it's still a pretty decent version of Pac-Man. The presentation's way better than the gameplay, but honestly, it's still pretty cool. Now, the Dreamcast version of Namco Museum is not as impressive as the PlayStation version. It definitely is a lot more boring, but it's still Pac-Man, and is the exact same version as the PlayStation version. And if you really want to, you can zoom in the screen. I didn't. But yeah, besides that, it's the same as the PlayStation version. We're on the Game Boy Advance with 3 more Pac-Mans. And the first one we're trying is the classic NES series, Pac-Man. This version of Pac-Man is the NES version of Pac-Man put onto a Game Boy Advance. And honestly, I'm not a fan of it. It's definitely worse than the NES version. And while playing, I kept going in directions that I didn't really want to go in. Like, I'll press down and I'll continue going right, because of the sprites that are bigger than the maze itself. So, yeah, it's not a very good version of Pac-Man. And it's also the NES version being compared with supposedly arcade versions of Pac-Man as well. So there's not really any reason to pick this up, unless you really like the NES version of Pac-Man. Next up is Pac-Man from the Pac-Man collection. This is a pretty decent version of Pac-Man. Now, the Pac-Man collection is just a collection of Pac-Man games. I'm not going to list all the games here. There's 4. Because we're only going to be focusing on Pac-Man. And this version of Pac-Man is pretty decent. You have the option of scroll or full screen, which I prefer full screen, but I understand why scroll's there. Again, I'm not a fan of the zoomed in screen, so full screen's definitely a welcome change. And this version of Pac-Man's pretty decent. I would recommend this one. Namco 50th Anniversary Collection for the Game Boy Advanced is interesting. I understand why the sounds are awful, but god damn are they bad. And this version of Pac-Man, it's okay. It's pretty okay. I did accidentally hit select, and that actively messed me up. Because it went to scroll, then sideways, and then back to normal. So select changes the orientation mid-gameplay, which is pretty nice, but also pretty bad. And I also did not finish the first level. But would I recommend this version? No, Pac-Man Collection is still the better one, because it has better sound. That's the only reason. Namco Museum's 50th Anniversary, you are getting most bang for your buck, but if you want a good version of Pac-Man, get the Pac-Man Collection. There's one that I'm going to be skipping, and that's Pac-Man Versus. Pac-Man Versus is kind of a real multiplayer version of Pac-Man, where the person with the Game Boy Advanced controls Pac-Man, and the people on the GameCube play as the ghosts. I'm pretty sure. I couldn't play this because I don't have anything that can really emulate Pac-Man Versus. I know Dolphin can, but the problem with Dolphin is that it doesn't run well on my computer, and I would like to use real hardware for it. So yeah, I'm going to be skipping Pac-Man Versus. Now, around this point is when we just get to emulation of Pac-Man at this point, because there's no real reason to recreate Pac-Man over and over and over again, especially for newer consoles when you could just change a few lines of code for a different controller on a different console to work. So, all these versions of Namco Museum and Pac-Man I'm going to be talking about past this point is just Pac-Man. There's no difference whatsoever. But you know, we still gotta review them all to see which one's the best for which console. And the first one we have is Namco Museum for the PlayStation 2. The presentation is really nice, and I actually had no fucking clue Pac-Man was even in the original Namco Museum for PlayStation 2, GameCube, and I think Xbox. But it's there, and it comes with also Pac-Man arrangement. I didn't like it. And there's also settings for Pac-Man to change the screen size. I don't understand why. It makes a very small amount of difference, but you can still do it. But is this a good version of Pac-Man? Yeah, but you're not really getting the most for your money with this one, unlike our next one. Namco Museum 50th Anniversary for PlayStation 2. I actually own a physical copy of this. for the GameCube, and this is definitely the best collection that's the most bang for your buck. You get a bunch of games, copywritten music in the menus. On the save file editing screen, you get a little Pac-Man arcade cabinet instead of just a flat image of Pac-Man. And also, you don't have an annoying border around the games. I mean, it's kind of cool that it's in Namco Museum, but it's just unnecessary. I'd rather have it just completely black there. So is this a good version to play Pac-Man on? The presentation is phenomenal, and I think this is the best Namco collection for PlayStation 2, GameCube, and maybe Xbox. I still don't know if there's a Namco Museum for Xbox, but there might be. Next up is Namco Museum for Nintendo GameCube. Why is there differences? Why is there very small but slight differences with this one? You would expect it to be pretty much the same, but on a GameCube disc? No, there's legitimate differences. One of the things is the mass media logo, moves. It's weird because usually PlayStation 2 games are the ones that have, animated shit. Yeah, I don't know why the GameCube version has it, but not the PlayStation 2 version. Also, the menu is, yellow. I don't understand that. But besides that, it's pretty normal Pac-Man, and the option to change the screen size actually makes a significant difference this time, instead of, 3 pixels. But yeah, this one still isn't as good as the 50th anniversary of Namco Museum, but, it's still interesting that there's slight differences with this one and the PS2 version. Namco Museum 50th Anniversary for Nintendo GameCube. I have actually kind of strong nostalgia for this, because I used to play the shit out of it at my grandma's house. On the Wii, on the big living room TV. And luckily I was able to keep the copy, because no one played it. So now I still have this copy of Namco Museum, and the reason I wasn't able to capture this from, real hardware was because, one, I couldn't be bothered to change in-kit ROMs to regular ROMs, and also my Wii's disk drive is broken. Yeah, that's why I played these on emulator. Now, overall, this is the exact same as the PS2 version of Namco Museum 50th Anniversary, just on GameCube, which is still the best version of Pac-Man to buy for GameCube, as you're getting a bunch of Namco games, and it's not just Pac-Man. So, usually I would review the original Xbox versions of Namco Museum. Except I can't, because emulating the Xbox is a pain in the ass, and I don't have physical copies of any of these games, and also I don't have a controller for the original Xbox I do have, so I'm not able to actually, put the ROMs on there. But I just really wanted to see what color they chose for Namco Museum, because the GameCube version's, yellow, and the PlayStation 2 version's, white. They chose the bluest blue I've ever seen. Like, this is so blue that sad is less blue. Like, man. But again, if I had to say, go with the 50th anniversary, because overall it's the most bang for your buck. Onto the Wii, we're gonna start with the Virtual Console version of NES Pac-Man. It's just NES Pac-Man again, but like darker. That's about it. There's not really much to talk about with Virtual Console, and this is the only time I'll be mentioning Virtual Console of Pac-Man, because these are all legitimately the exact same game, just on different hardware. But if you really like NES Pac-Man, get this on Wii, Wii U, and 3DS. Any means necessary, since all their eShops are closed. But I'm pretty sure all these consoles have a way of playing like a good version of Pac-Man, so I wouldn't really recommend going with the NES version. Namco Museum Megamix, not Remix, Megamix. Now, this is one of, if not the most annoying fucking things I've had to deal with. When you hear Namco Museum Remix, and you heard that it comes with the classic Namco games, you would think it would come with a regular fucking copy of Pac-Man. No, it does not. It comes with Pac-N-Pal, though. How the hell are you gonna put Pac-N-Pal above Pac-Man? And it doesn't help the fact that controlling this thing is annoying as hell. And I had to legitimately search around just to find the museum of the classic games just so I can realize, oh shit, this is not the one with the regular Pac-Man. Yeah. So, booting up actual Megamix now, there's Pac-Man. I'm happy they included Pac-Man in the remake of this game. So now whenever you buy Remix, you realize, oh shit, I wasted my money. Instead of buying Megamix, which is the one that just has a regular version of Pac-Man. And honestly, this isn't fun. Having to go through this hub world just to play regular Pac-Man. And what sucks is that it's either this or Virtual Console NES Pac-Man. You don't really get a choice for legitimate Pac-Mans on the Wii. So the Wii is probably the worst console to play Pac-Man on, honestly. But since this is really your only Pac-Man, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that Wii owners only got 2 versions of Pac-Man, and they're both annoying as hell. Ooh, another game I can't play. Pac-Man Museum for Xbox Live Arcade and PS3. Yeah, I can't play these because this was delisted. And the fact is, and I really don't want to deal with like downloading ROM of this and trying to figure out how an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3 emulator works. There's also a giant risk of just using emulators like those anyway, so yeah, no. I'm just gonna skip Pac-Man Museum. But it is nice to know that we're almost done with this. We're getting close to finishing up the real console and handheld ports of Pac-Man. We haven't even gotten into computer or mobile ports of Pac-Man yet, or even miscellaneous versions of Pac-Man, like the plug and plays. But it's still nice to know that we're almost done. Namco Museum DS for, you could probably guess what. And, well, this beginning cutscene is a little cute. I sure hope the game doesn't look like actual ass. Jesus Christ. Yeah, this game doesn't look that good. And this game has like 100 different options to make this game look a little better. Yeah, I'm just gonna play it with default. And overall, this is a pretty decent Pac-Man for on the go. But I still think the Game Boy Advance version is slightly better from the Pac-Man collection. This one is pretty decent, but it's just no Pac-Man collection. But you do get a handful more games like Galaga and Dig Dug. And hey, it even has Pac-Man Versus. I didn't know there was another version of Pac-Man Versus. Namco Museum Battle Collection for the PlayStation Portable. Surprisingly, there was never a PSP Mini for Pac-Man, but there was a full-on collection that had Pac-Man in it. And this version of Pac-Man is probably the best one you're going to get for playing Pac-Man on the go, as it looks perfect. Now, if you're wondering why the gameplay is so slow, I honestly don't know. Pac-Man is too intensive for my PSP emulator running on my computer. Yet Family Guy the video game isn't. I don't know how that works. But yeah, the gameplay is going to be very slow. But assure you, this should run perfectly fine on normal hardware. And again, this is probably the best one you're going to get for playing Pac-Man on the go. Besides getting like Pac-Man Museum Plus for the Switch. But overall, this is probably the best you're going to get for a Pac-Man on the go. And also, using the D-pad is a very smart move than using the joystick, because the PSP joystick sucks, like hard. So using the D-pad is definitely optimal. Pac-Man for Xbox 360. This is a very good port of Pac-Man. I would say probably even the best. And hey, look, achievements. And this game has pretty reasonable achievements, like eat each kind of fruit, beats certain levels, eat all 4 ghosts 4 times in a row in a single round, one of the worst achievements ever in Pac-Man. And it comes back in future versions of Pac-Man with achievements. But besides that, this Pac-Man controls really good. And I mean really good. Like, this is probably the best you're going to get at a home console Pac-Man. And you can still buy it too, and it's one of those things that gets frequent discounts. Same thing with the arcade classics Pac-Man as well. So if you have the money, pick up one of these two. Now, just to get the Wii U out of the way, there is a handful of ways to play Pac-Man on the Wii U, but personally I think the best way is through the Pac-Man collection. I shit you not, the Pac-Man collection from the Game Boy Advanced is one of the games you could buy on the Wii U Virtual Console. Of course, regular Pac-Man's there, but why would you get that when you could get the Pac-Man collection? Holy shit. That's actually like one of the best Wii U Virtual Console games besides Mario Advanced 4. And having all the e-reader levels. So yeah, luckily Wii U fans have a pretty decent way of playing Pac-Man. But surprisingly, besides that, there really wasn't a normal Pac-Man release on the Wii U. Besides the Virtual Consoles and the Super Smash Bros. Wii U Masterpiece having a demo of Pac-Man for NES there. Man, there's just no good way to play Pac-Man on this thing besides that Pac-Man collection, huh? Next up, we have Pac-Man and Galaga Dimensions for Nintendo 3DS. Why did they call it that? That's a weird name. And really, this collection is just Pac-Man and Galagas. If it was awesome, this is, I'm gonna say it, this is better than the PSP Pac-Man. Because you have several different versions of Pac-Man. Why? This is a really cool collection for the 3DS. Now, as you can tell from the gameplay footage, I forgot I had, like, speed turned up. Yeah, sorry. But besides that, this is a really cool collection, and I would recommend it if you have a 3DS. Or just hack one and put it on there. Because this collection is awesome from the very little bit that I played of just Pac-Man. We're on the home stretch of official console Pac-Man ports. Or as official as we can get. Now, of course, I'm going to be skipping Nintendo Switch, PS4, and PS Vita. Because all of these are still in circulation, so there's no emulation of it. And I'm not going to buy entire consoles just for Pac-Man. Anyway, we're going to be talking about Pac-Man Museum Plus, which is the sequel to Pac-Man Museum on the 360 and PS3. This came out on Xbox One, PS4, and Nintendo Switch. And honestly, this is a really nice collection. You can choose whatever song. You can rearrange your little Pac-Man arcade room. It's honestly really cool. Now, how does the Pac-Man play? It plays like Pac-Man. Who would have guessed? But besides that, this is a very cool collection, and I would recommend playing it. And what's even more cool about it is that it's on Game Pass. So really, you don't even have to buy it, or until they take it off of Game Pass. So I may or may not have straight up just bought a Pac-Man for this video. But you can't blame me. It was 3 arcade games for $7. Like, come on. So now we're going to be talking about the arcade game series Pac-Man for Xbox One and most likely PS4. I don't know if it's on there. And this version of Pac-Man annoys the shit out of me. The reason being is that the overlay that it has, that actually covers up the game screen, which I'm not a fan of. And also the fact that I can't really zoom it in very well either. And you would think, oh, just turn off the overlay. You can't turn off that overlay. It has to be there. You can't just have it black, which is kind of annoying for me because I'm not gonna lie, it's very distracting. But hey, at least I can enable the 256th bug, or the fucking test image that it plays whenever you boot up Pac-Man. That's pretty cool. But besides that, this really just feels like the Xbox 360 version of Pac-Man, just ported onto Xbox One. I mean, even most of the achievements are the same, except with a few extra ones. Now, another issue that I have with this is that achievements will pop during gameplay. Yikes, because it actually covers up the bottom row of dots. Now, the default size negates that, but you know me, I like having my screen zoomed in so I can see the full board. So you can imagine how upsetting it would be. But besides the handful of flaws with it, this is still a pretty decent version of Pac-Man, but I would personally prefer Pac-Man Museum Plus. I feel like that's the best bundle, because even with the $7, you only get 3 arcade games, while with Pac-Man Museum Plus, you get a bunch of Pac-Man. Namco Museum Archives Volume 1. I'm not paying $20 for this. That is way too much money for 11 NES games. Yeah, these are the NES versions of these games. Which, I mean, it's pretty cool being able to have an official way to play Mappy, the NES version of Mappy, since that never came out in the US. But this is still not a good collection, because it's $20 for NES games. That also includes the NES version of Pac-Man. How come they're so consistent with releasing the NES version of Pac-Man? It doesn't make sense. Almost every console has the NES version. Now, would I say this is a good collection? I mean, it is 11 NES games for $20. So I'm not 100% sure. Personally, I would just choose, like, if you really wanted to play Pac-Man, just choose that $3 arcade game series Pac-Man if you really want to play Pac-Man. And this is also another release with the NES version of Championship Edition, which is a very kind of hard game to come across. But besides a handful of this stuff, there's no reason to buy this besides NES Pac-Man if you're a real big fan of NES Pac-Man. And with that, that's almost every official console port of Pac-Man. Now, I will be splitting up this video in 3 different parts. You have just watched part 1, talking about the console and handheld versions of Pac-Man. Part 2 will be the PC and mobile ports of Pac-Man, because honestly, those take a lot longer. And part 3 will be the miscellaneous versions of Pac-Man, that being your plug-and-plays, your bootlegs, your homebrews, and all of that nature. Now, I originally wanted all these to be put into one full, like, long video. I couldn't do that. Trust me, I really want to, but I can't, because that would be a giant pain in the ass for not just me, but also my hard drive. So, yeah, that's why I'm doing these in parts. And also just so I can get this video released and I can stop having like 50 different gameplay footages of Pac-Man on my computer. So yeah, stay tuned for part 2 of Pac-Man that will release in like another 50 months.